Welcome to Ag Matters, covering positive agriculture stories from across Alaska on Big Cabbage Radio.
Hey, welcome to Ag Matters Radio. I'm Tandy, your host, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today with Sam Knapp. Sam is quite the accomplished fella. I understand you have a farm in the Fairbanks area. I'm not sure exactly where you're located, and I actually have a copy of your book, and so we're going to kind of talk about both those things today. How you doing, Sam?
Oh, I'm doing great. I was just talking about it's cold here in Fairbanks. We've got a good inversion going, so it's about 30 degrees warmer here at the farm than down in the valley.
Oh, interesting. Well, let's just lead off with that. I want to talk about that. So why are you warmer where you are at the farm than in the valley all the time, or just?
Yeah, just right now. As many people familiar to interior Alaska know, that in the wintertime the valleys tend to be much colder than higher elevation. So here at the farm we're about not that much, maybe 250, 300 feet above the valley floor. Today it's getting us 30 extra degrees compared to 30 below at the airport. We're at about 0 right now.
Well, that's impressive. That's awesome.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, it's a huge benefit for heating costs through the winter.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's awesome. That's so true. So let's talk a little bit about your farm. Let's start there. So tell us what it is that you grow.
Yeah, so the farm is small. It's about 1 acre in vegetable production, and I grow entirely storage crops, things that I can tend during the summer, harvest in the fall, and then store and sell during the wintertime. So those are things like, kind of the classic roots like carrots and beets and turnips. We also do cabbages and kohlrabis, and we do some winter squash and garlic, things like that. Working on onions here, but having issues with light length and storage onions, causing problems with them. Onions is still a work in progress.
Fair enough. It sounds like you're growing quite a bit. What gave you this idea to take really on a grand perspective of farms, you've got a little micro property. What gave you the idea to take this acre and grow food, not just for yourself, but for your community?
Yeah, I had been, before we moved to Fairbanks 5 years ago, I had been running a part-time farm in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and before that working for other vegetable farmers. And so I've known I'd wanted to be a vegetable farmer for over 10 years now, but the impetus to do storage in particular kind of came in Michigan. It was that I was in graduate school at the time, and I just didn't have time to run a traditional farm. And a mentor gave me the idea to focus on storage crops so that I could kind of spread the workload throughout the year. And that worked out well, and I found that I liked it so much and that the communities responded so well to it that I've just kept doing it.
Well, that's pretty great. And another huge advantage to the crops that you're growing is they're crops that thrive here anyway, right? So you're not fighting the climate by trying to commercially grow tomatoes, which is not a bad thing. We also need tomatoes.
Right.
But you're kind of working with your climate, and then you're able to offer food. Now, are you able to do this year-round? How long do your crops last?
I typically sell out by mid-April or so, and by that point, the carrots and beets, they still are saleable. They may start to look a little sad by that point. But that said, I continue to eat seconds and things well into the spring and early summer. We were finishing cabbages from the previous season in July of last year, so they can last quite a long time. Whether or not they're, a saleable quality is kind of another question.
I completely get that. We have things here on our farm that's what we do. We call ourselves the pigs because we're the ones who take like the seconds and we give the good stuff to the public. I totally get that.
That's life as a farmer. You just have to you get used to eating the rejects.
That's right, because you're definitely not going to be throwing these things out.
Right.
So I want to take a step backwards because I feel like we just kind of jumped right in. Tell us about the structure of your farm. So you grow these mainly root crops and kind of cold weather crops in the summer, and then I assume around September, like you open up to the public, and then do people come to you, or how are they getting a hold of your fruit? What's the overall structure of your farm?
I'd say about 75 to 80% of what we sell goes through a winter CSA, which we're selling kind of late in comparison to the other CSAs. I'm usually filling that in August and early September. And then people in the CSA are receiving vegetables every other week, starting November and going through March. The other 25% of sales is kind of a mixture of markets that are happening around the holidays, and then I do a little bit of wholesale to the roaming root cellar in town, selling them mostly carrots. But yeah, September, so we're growing in the summertime. As far as sales in the summer, it's really minimal. Might sell a few garlic scapes here and there when they're ready. If my wife is going to market with fish that she retails from friends in Cordova, then she might bring a few incidental things. But the vast majority of what we sell is in the wintertime. And September is when we do our main harvest, usually starting just after Labor Day, and it's intensive harvesting. I'll bring on a couple of extra crew members, and we're doing nothing but harvesting for about a month, with the goal of being done by about October 1st to give us a week, 10-day buffer between our average freeze update. We don't want to have to be chiseling carrots out of the ground.
No,
or digging them
nobody wants to do that.
No, it's definitely not fun.
So this kind of brings me, well, first of all, it's just really neat that you, the majority of CSAs, as you know, run through the summer. And so I love that you found a solution for something that wasn't already available. My son has started several businesses, and they've all been successful. And I asked him one time, like, how do you pick what business to start? And he said, well, I find a problem that no one else is solving, and I solve it. That's a great way to look at it, right? And it kind of sounds like that's what you've done, in that, plenty of people want to support Alaska grown all winter, but the grocery stores run out of carrots, about now. And
yeah.
And then what? So I love that you're offering that for your community. So,
yeah, I would love to say that I had the foresight of your son, but I think I more fell into it based on the advice of others.
Well, either way, you solved a problem, and that's what we need. That's what we do as entrepreneurs, right? Where we see we see a problem and solve it, whether we fall into it or clearly think that mindset. So how are you storing all of these? Like an acre of vegetables, that's a lot. And you have the benefit, if we want to call it that, of freezing weather that isn't kind, especially to root vegetables that are out of the ground. So how are you storing these things?
When I built the farm, one of the first things that I did was secure financing through the Farm Service Agency to build a storage building. It's kind of like a traditional root cellar, but with some modern upgrades. It's built into a hillside, kind of like a one-story walkout basement style thing, where the front of the building is at ground level and the back of it is dug into the hill. It's roughly, from the outside, it looks like a garage. It's about 25 feet square, and I've divided it in half, where one half is kind of the warm and dry side. I keep it around 50 degrees through most of the winter, while the winter squash are in here anyway, and this is the side that I do all the packing work and getting orders ready. And the other side I keep at 32 degrees and as close to 100% relative humidity as I can get it. And that's the side that stores all the kind of like cold-loving stuff, the roots, the cabbages, the kohlrabis, that kind of stuff. The way that I climate control that side is in the fall, it's refrigerated mechanically. I have a CoolBot set up right now with a couple large air conditioners controlled by CoolBots, bringing it down into the mid-30s. Once it's cold enough, we switch over to a really simple system using some thermostat outlets. Inkbird is what we use, but there are other ones out there too that watch the temperature inside and outside and pull in cold air to keep the room at 32. And there's also a commercial humidifier controlled by a humidistat that keeps the room as humid as we want it to be. And everything is built to deal with just the huge amounts of moisture that we're dumping into the air. So we do see condensation on the wall surfaces, but but the materials are such that they can handle that.
That was going to lead to my next question was, 100% humidity and 32 degrees feels like almost like snow. Like I can imagine that it's being that humid inside, moisture would almost become an issue, but it sounds like you've tackled that too. So,
part of it's kind of being careful with construction. You have to use the vapor barrier techniques that builders in Alaska are familiar with. But it's just, if you're not going to keep it that humid, then you have to do some kind of techniques to create microenvironments for the veggies, because otherwise they'll dry out.
Well, that makes perfect sense. So that kind of segues me into this book that I have in front of me. Most of us in the agriculture or homesteading world have heard of the publisher Chelsea Green, because they're the ones who kind of put out all of our favorite books, right? And they recently reached out to me because you have a book, and they sent me a copy. And I haven't had the opportunity to get into it. The very next one on my stack, but I needed to get through the holidays first. But I did open it up, and I have to tell you, when I first opened it up, I saw the line that said, "Sometimes life presents you with conundrums," and I thought, what a hook, because who wouldn't? So who doesn't have some sort of a conundrum? And it sounds like, from the sounds of things, you're going to help us solve this. So your book, which is Beyond the Root Cellar, how did that come to be? And talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, it's hard to say when the transition came between me noticing that there were books on, all sorts of other topics. You can almost name a subject in agriculture and there's a book about it. And while I was getting into winter storage in Michigan, I just kind of had to piece together a lot of it myself. There are resources out there for homesteaders and kind of home gardeners. There are very few resources for people doing this at a commercial scale, and particularly this kind of middle to small commercial scale. And so I was noticing that this gap in the resources, and it's hard to say when it turned from somebody should write a book about this to I should write a book about this. I think part of that was coming off of graduate school. I felt like, I gained some skills as far as reading a lot of material and kind of synthesizing that down or boiling that down into something digestible and interesting. And I had been writing for Growing for Market magazine, writing some articles about storage, and just got some encouragement from the editor there that I should continue with the book project. And, one thing led to another, and there I was writing a book. And it took about 2 to 3 years, depending on where you count the starting date, but 2 solid winters of writing to get it finished. And I'm really happy with how it's turned out. It was an interesting process, courting a publisher and signing a contract and doing all that. But now that I'm through the end of it, I'm kind of surprised that there's actually a product. It just kind of became something you work on day to day. And you can let me know if there are any content questions.
We are excited to tell folks that you're going to be at our Alaska Homestead Expo, which is April 4th, 5th, and 6th. And so what's neat is if folks want to get a hold of this book, then they can come to you. They're going to be able to meet you as the author and ask questions. And a lot of times I feel like we're able to ask questions of people who have knowledge, but the knowledge isn't quite as specific as maybe what we need. And so the fact that you live in Alaska and you understand the challenges and, there's benefits of our climate too, but that you understand that's huge. And so that gives people an opportunity to really dig in to growing this. I have a question for you. One of your chapters is called Not Your Grandmother's Root Cellar. Do you mind kind of digging into that just a little bit? And then the following one is Planning a Modern Root Cellar. So what would you say if you had to describe it in a minute or two? What's the difference between the way you see a modern root cellar working versus one that was done maybe 100 years ago?
Yeah. So the main difference is the ability to climate control a space. The old-time grandmother root cellars or the traditional root cellars are usually passive. They're relying upon the ground to insulate them and keep things protected during the winter time. And that was a great way for folks before electricity, before mechanical refrigeration and thermostats and all these things to keep themselves fed through the winter time. But, like I say in the book, for better or worse, the modern food system has raised the bar for standards that people are used to buying their vegetables at. And so as modern farmers and food producers, if you're going to be selling your produce in any way, then you need to meet a higher standard, which you can do through climate control, refrigeration, and humidification. Kind of getting into like what separates what I'd call like a modern root cellar from the traditional types. Usually the traditional types are usually uninsulated, whereas insulating a root cellar, even if it is underground, it kind of has all those traditional aspects, allows you to do things, like control the temperature that you might not otherwise be able to do if you haven't insulated it. Yeah, I think that at the outset, folks who are growing food for themselves might, wonder why is this for me? Why won't a traditional root cellar work? And my response to that would be that yes, it does work, and you don't necessarily have to meet commercial standards growing food for yourself and your family, but the techniques that I talk about are kind of like widely applicable to any kind of vegetables that you're storing to keep them in the best condition for as long as possible. So it might be things that you're doing around harvest time or curing, or when to wash your vegetables, how to keep them from drying out, all these things that just don't happen automatically just because you have a hole in the ground that you're treating as a root cellar.
Right. I have learned, as we've started to supply more of our own food, one of the challenges, it was kind of funny because I kind of felt like, well, I know quite a bit. I can do quite a few things.
Yeah.
So I can I can dehydrate, I can, and one of the things that I am passionate about is perennial crops, although I know they're not like the traditional perennial crops, but like potatoes. We save our seed potatoes every year. Anything that I'm not having to purchase from the store to keep going for the following year. So any seeds that I can save, any crops that I can replant, garlic, potatoes, things like that. But that means that you have to store them until it's planting time. And that, I think, was probably the biggest challenge that I ran into with potatoes. And we still, they're Frankenstein potatoes by the time they get planted because they've been out of the ground for 9 months. And I'm sure that if we had some sort of, more proper storage, they wouldn't look quite as crazy. But we've had a couple of years where the potatoes were too far gone and we had to go buy new. And with proper storage, we've learned we can eat them longer. When we first started this, our potatoes would go bad, like January. And now we've extended it, well into April. And now our seed potatoes do a lot better. But the long-term storage has probably been, for root crops and things, has probably been our biggest challenge.
Mm-hmm. Something that I think people will appreciate about the book is that I've taken time to talk with farmers from all over the country and in Canada as well at a bunch of different scales and see what they're doing and what works. And kind of through that, you see that even at a small scale, you don't necessarily need to build an expensive, complicated space to store things through the wintertime. An example is my first farm in Michigan. I was only growing on a quarter acre, so it was a few thousand pounds that I was selling and storing in the winter. But that space was like an auxiliary stairwell going down into the basement, and I insulated the upper portion of it and, set up an air conditioner with a cool bot for the fall harvest time. But then again, through the winter, it was just an intake fan on a thermostat and a small 1,500 watt space heater on a thermostat and a box fan, and that's what kept those veggies good through March, April, and beyond. So it doesn't have to be complicated. People can do this at whatever scale makes sense for them and do it relatively inexpensively.
I think that's the key component right there. And Sam, I'm excited that we can meet you in person at our expo. And so if folks want to learn more about you, though, if they want to talk with you before then, how can they find you? How can they reach out to you?
I'd send them to the farm website. It is offbeetalaska.com, and beet is spelled like the vegetable.
Okay. All right. They'll go to the website. There's a contact form there. And then if you want to ask Sam questions ahead of time, you sure can. And Sam, I look really forward to meeting you in April.
Yeah, likewise. It'll be a fun fun to drive down to Wasilla, or Big Lake, I suppose, and meet the Alaska homesteading crowd.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be a good time for sure. Sam, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, appreciate the chance to chat.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Okay.
You've been listening to Ag Matters, covering positive agriculture stories from across Alaska on Big Cabbage Radio. Ag Matters is a production of Radio Free Palmer, recorded at our studios in Palmer, Alaska. For more information about this program, email manager@radiofreepalmer.org.